Good morning and welcome to Recipe for Success. Today I am joined by my guest and actually good friend as well, Kristine Scheer with K2 Strategic. And I'm really excited for this discussion because we are going to talk about women's healthcare statistics that prevent women from getting some of the access to care and the quality of care that we take for granted that we think we should have. But before we jump into all of that, I would love to have Kristine take just a moment and introduce herself to all of you and tell you a little bit about her career history and all the good things.
Sure. Happy to be here, Nancy. Thanks for having me. I have been in the employee benefits career now for 30 years. And I sort of stumbled into this career. I don't think most people go into employee benefits intentionally or knowingly. But it popped into my world in 1993 and has been a wonderful experience. And as my career has grown and I've become an entrepreneur in the field as an employee benefit consultant, one of the really wonderful things about that is that I get to intentionally incorporate things that are very important to me at this point in my life and share them and bring them to my clients and those around me. And women's health is one of those topics that I'm very passionate about and that I see that's been lacking not only in employee benefits, but across the benefit spectrum and the healthcare delivery spectrum in our country.
Yes, isn't that the truth? Before we get into, you know what, I'm going to actually jump into this because I think this is going to be a really good jumping off point for our discussion. And because I like to make things really challenging for everybody. I am going to let's see. Do I have these? Oh, we didn't do it that way. Sorry, I'm not super technologically savvy with all of this. So let's see if I can do this. Oh, probably that's not the right choice. That's all right. I'm going to get there. But I want to share this because I think that this is super important. All right, let's go to slideshow. Okay, so I can't see the screen. So if anybody's commenting or anything, just know I can't see this at the moment. But I wanted to run through these slides because this is something Kristine shared on social media a couple days ago. And quite frankly, it took, we're having some, Kristine?
Yes,
Can you hear me?
I can.
Did you hear that kind of interference?
No.
Okay, well, then good. Glad to know it's just me. All right. But these are slides that she shared a couple days ago, and I think that they are incredibly telling. So let's see if I can get this little guy off of my screen. So before 1978, women could legally be fired from their workplace for being pregnant. Can you think about that for a minute? That's terrifying, really. Oh gosh, the text is not showing on this one. But before 1974, women were not allowed to apply for credit on their own. Before 1977, workers couldn't take action against sexual harassment in the workplace. I can tell you that even after 1977, although they may have legally been entitled to, it certainly was not encouraged or a very easy thing to do. Women couldn't serve on a jury in all 50 states. And I'm sorry, again, this is coming up a little wonky. I can't see the date, but it wasn't that long ago. Before 1998, this is the one that got me. Workers were guaranteed maternity leave. I had my child before 1998. So this one really hit home for me. And it was a pretty big deal about negotiating with my employer whether I could take time off or not. Did you experience that, Kristine?
I had all three of my daughters prior to 1998. And I was only working professionally for one of them. And it was sort of a unique situation when I had her. But it's crazy to think that less than 30 years ago, that was the case.
Yeah. And it wasn't like we got a lot of time off either. I got 6 weeks.
Yeah.
And there was no consideration for dads either. I might add that as well. But
None.
this one just really blows me away. I'm expecting my first grandchild in June, and to see the difference in the experience that my son and daughter-in-law are going through being pregnant and the things that they don't have to worry about now is crazy. So I'm very happy about it, but it's a little bit shocking.
Yes, one of my children lives in another country in Europe. And when she and her husband had their first child a couple of years ago, between the two of them, nationally, the parents get a total of 12 months off. And then another one of my children had their first last year and works for a Canadian-based company and received 5 or 6 months off, of paid leave. So,
Yeah.
Our country, nationally from a legal perspective is certainly lagging in that regard. I know many states have stepped in and started to do things to push this forward a little bit more. But it is pretty appalling that from a physical perspective, a woman who's given birth, has to fight for paid time off, and that the other parent in the situation also has to do the same.
Yeah, it really is. Before 1972, women couldn't run in the Boston Marathon. I love the little in parentheses, legally, of course, because
Mhm.
anybody that has been around the running world at all knows that women ran illegally in that for quite a number of years before they were actually allowed. And then before 2018, guys, this is 5 years ago, mothers couldn't publicly breastfeed in all 50 states. I mean, I have no words for this.
Yeah.
So,
if I didn't know it, I wouldn't believe it.
yeah, it's a little crazy. Okay, so let's see if we can stop that share, make sure that I got that down. Okay, we got through that. So I would like to show this comment because this is my mom. So if I had my child before 1998, you can do the math on this. And she says, I remember all of these. But it's funny how quickly we forget. Like we just put that out of our mind. And one of the things you and I have talked about a lot, Kristine, is that we came into the industry, we came into our professional careers at a time when it was very challenging for women. And it seemed like we made really big strides and really big progress for a while. And then all of a sudden, we just quietly kind of took a number of steps backwards.
Yep.
So I think this topic of women's health is so important. And I just thought that was a really good foundation to lay for this discussion before we started. I have one more slide to show real quick. Let's see if I can do this without being a complete dork about this. Okay, share screen. Because this is going to lead into our next topic, and it has to do with equity and equality. And Kristine, once I bring this up, I would like for you to explain it to our audience, please.
Sure. This is one of my favorite charts to visually show the difference between, there it is.
There it is. Sorry about that.
Between equality and equity. And I'm not even sure that I fully understood this until the last few years. So this visual helped me personally better comprehend this topic. And what it shows you is the difference between equality and equity. So in this visual, you have 3 people trying to reach an apple on a tree that is situated at the same height. And what you can see from the picture is that it's equal. Everybody has equal access to an apple at the same height. But what you can clearly tell is that not everybody has the same true access to that apple. While access might be equal, it's not equitable. And in this picture, I would be the person on the right of the equality chart as like the shortest person in the room, just barely breaking 5 feet tall. So for me to reach that apple versus you, Nancy, or somebody else, in one of our groups, it's much more challenging for me to reach it. I need assistance from a height perspective to get to it. And so what it really says is that each of us does not have the same true access to something. And from the perspective of women's healthcare, as we talk today, and many of the things that you and I both have previously discussed or researched, we know that women's healthcare is truly not equal in the United States, but it's also very, very inequitable. And that goes from the perspectives of how women are diagnosed, how women are treated, not just from a clinical treatment perspective, but how they're treated in a relationship perspective by clinicians, and how their healthcare is paid for, both from an insurance design or an employee benefits design perspective, and ultimately delivered. So there are so many different factors in women's healthcare in the United States that are both unequal and inequitable.
Thank you. Honestly, when you sent this to me, I think it clicked for me for the first time too, exactly what the difference between equity and equality were. Because I don't, it's a difficult concept to grasp, but this just really, I'm like, okay, I get it. So, one of the reasons that I wanted to lay the foundation for our discussion with those slides is that you have a unique perspective, not only, and this is something that you've been passionate about, but because you do have daughters that have lived in different countries and that have had babies in different countries.
Yeah.
So you have a fairly unique perspective on how things work here, as well as how things work elsewhere. So one of the things that you shared with me is that the U.S. Okay, let's say that 3 times fast. The U.S. maternal mortality rate is among the highest among similar wealth nations. So in other words, other countries that are not third world countries that have a decent living standard, that have good income levels. We have the highest mortality rate associated with maternity. Why?
It's absolutely appalling. And on top of that, not only do women in the United States have a higher, maternal death rate and other negative correlations related to maternity and birth, Black and Indigenous women in our country have 2 to 3 times a higher rate than similarly situated women in other wealthier countries. And there are a myriad of reasons for that I've learned over the last couple of years that I've been studying this. One of those has to do with the rate of C-sections that we perform in this country is radically higher than that in other countries. And why? Why do we perform so many more C-sections in this country? And a lot of what I've studied actually ties back to money and ease of scheduling in the US healthcare system. So healthcare systems and obstetricians in the United States, who are largely performing those services for women, are finding that it's much more convenient to schedule them at a time that works well for you as a clinician, as well as the woman who's giving birth, and B, you make more money. So you make more money from the insurance company when you perform a C-section than if it's a vaginal birth. And I'm not saying that, I don't want to paint a bad picture about obstetricians in our country, but the correlation very clearly exists. So whether it's driven by health systems wanting more money and incentives for the obstetricians there, whether it's driven by, a personal decision between the woman and her doctor, we clearly perform more C-sections in this country. Another huge contributing factor is poor prenatal care and lack of access not only to that prenatal care, but prior to a woman becoming pregnant, having access to good health care in the United States. And that's where a lot of the inequity comes into play. And with the statistic that I shared about Black and Indigenous women having even higher rates, when you look at some of the specifics in the studies, you can very clearly see that they're more, unfortunately, likely to have lower access to quality care before they become pregnant and while they are pregnant. So those 2 factors alone have a real correlation between our poor comparative factors.
Yeah, it's disturbing. I mean, I can't really think of any other way to describe it, but it is disturbing in a nation like ours that's an issue, that they can't get good access to care. But I do want to, before we move on, I actually want to talk about the C-section issue just a tiny bit more, because oftentimes we like to point fingers in the whole healthcare problem. We like to point fingers at insurance companies. We like to point fingers at providers. But also there's patient education that should be happening, and people should be making
Yes.
good decisions. I personally have heard people say to my face, so I'm not repeating anything, oh, I'm just going to have a C-section because it's going to be more convenient for me. Um, I don't think they're understanding that that's still major surgery
Hmm.
and that the complications that can occur from that. But we allow that. We say, okay, yeah, no problem, because ding, 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 like you say, that's going to result in more income. There's not generally a really good discussion about why do you feel that that's important.
You make a great point, and I wonder, I can think back, of course, late my daughters are, in their upper 20s and early 30s, and I can think back to my time period. We never really had conversations about a C-section. One of my children was almost delivered by a C-section, wasn't delivered by a C-section, but was almost. And my doctor and I had never discussed what would happen if we got to that point and what it would look like for me and what my experience might be if we had to go to that. So it was all literally happening in like 30 to 60 seconds as they were wheeling me down the hall to that, more sterile delivery environment,
Mm-hmm.
should I ultimately need to have that. So I think you make an excellent point.
Um, anyway, it's just my take is that everybody contributes to the problem, and we never like to look at ourselves as far as how where what's our part, what's my part in this. Okay, so when Kristine and I were talking about doing this, she sent me a lot of information, and I kind of had to sort it out and think about what were the key points that I wanted to touch on, and this one honestly blew me away. Women were not required to be included in U.S. clinical research until 1993. That means that all these studies were being done on therapies, drugs, procedures on men only.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. They were either being done on men only, or women weren't required. So it doesn't
Right.
mean that women weren't a part of them, but it means that they weren't required. So for things like, one of the things that sticks out to me a lot today, and I was just reminded of this last month as we had, Go Red for Women Day and Women's Heart Health Month. Women die of heart attacks in this country more than men.
Yep.
Globally, women die of heart attacks more than men. And I don't think a lot of people realize that. And when we think of a heart attack, many of us generally have a visual from, movies or TV of, the person grabbing their arm, and all of a sudden that's how they're, presenting as their first symptom of having a heart attack. Well, guess what? That's not how women generally present when they're, having a heart attack. And you think about how not only from a symptom and a diagnosis perspective, but then also ultimately treatment for heart-related situations, if women weren't being required to be included in those studies for diagnosis, treatment, and prescriptions medications associated with that until 1993, and then you think about the length of most clinical studies in order for them to be valid, a lot of information around women's heart health and other, everything else wasn't beginning to come out until the 2000s or the 2010s for these longer studies. So, there's information that's truly just hitting today and in the last 5 to 10 years that is because of that NIH revitalization law that was passed and signed into law in 1993. So it's crazy.
It is. And, specifically around women's heart health, you mentioned Go Red for Women, and, we've all participated in that and heard the talks, and it's still so underrepresented.
Mm-hmm.
It's still so underrepresented. And you give the movie example. When's the last time in a movie you saw a woman having a heart attack? They're hit by cars or natural disasters or something else, but that's not really presented as a normal thing. And unfortunately, it is a normal thing. But let's take that into the discussion around treatments for whatever the situation may be, because women's bodies, let's face it, they're different than men's. We generally have a different weight. BMI factors, the way we
Mhm.
metabolize things.
Mhm.
But for the majority of physicians, they're prescribing the same way.
Yes, I was actually discussing this with one of my prescription consultants just yesterday, and it happens to be a woman who does a lot of educating too around DE and I. And we were talking about this, and it's fascinating because, think about the last time that you were meeting with your doctor, either physically or virtually, and they prescribed something for you. I just did a virtual visit a month or so ago, and at no point in that virtual visit, and it was the first time I had ever done one with this organization and this clinical organization, at no point when they prescribed me something, because I walked away with a couple of prescriptions, did they ask me for my height or weight. At no point. And I was prescribed, these medications and went and picked them up. But in normal situations, when I'm physically with my regular primary care doctor, they know my height and weight, and they're prescribing usually based on height and weight and the diagnosis. And usually those are the only three factors. I'm sorry, there's usually a fourth factor, which is what other medications am I also taking? So, or do I have any medication allergies? But beyond those things, there's usually nothing that's incorporated into their decisions about me being a woman and how women respond to specific medications versus men. And it's a biological and chemical thing. And what studies have been showing repeatedly is that women do respond differently to many medications than men, and they still don't know why. So, for example, many times women are having headaches when they are taking certain medications, and men aren't. And we know that women have, hormones that are different than men, that are different for us, perhaps at different times in the month, at different times in our lives, at different situations. It could be impacted by a variety of different factors. And that's not being considered in medication prescription as a form of treatment.
Well, I'm married, and over the years, there's been times when I'm like, okay, I'm going to go on a diet. I need to lose 5 pounds or 10 pounds or whatever it is. And my husband would always say, okay, I'll do it with you. And I would look at him like, don't you dare, because you're going to think about going on a diet and drop 10 pounds, and I'm going to gain a pound. So, because and the only reason I bring that up is because our bodies metabolize things differently.
Mhm.
Men and women's bodies metabolize medication, food, they just respond differently. So your point is so well taken that it's just not enough consideration given to that yet. And I think, well, as a country, we're over medicated anyway. And
Mhm.
the first response always is, well, let me prescribe a pill for that, instead of looking at what's going on with you holistically first.
Yeah. And there are also studies, that very much back up the fact that women are being over medicated. And, there's there's so much that goes into that. And, there are studies that show that women are being over medicated. And then there are also studies that show that women are less likely to be given medication in certain situations than men are. So, that we're not being taken as seriously as men are when we present and explain our situations. I've spoken to so many women of all ages who have, story after story after story after story. And this stuff is also backed up by quantitative studies, as well as, my own sort of informal qualitative conversations, that, they go in and say, I'm having these symptoms, or my child's having these symptoms, what should I do? And they're, basically being told that, oh, it's probably just hormones, or you're having your monthly cycle, so it'll probably go away after your cycle is done, and not being given the same opportunity for medication that could potentially assist them, truly help them as quickly as they are as men. And along those same lines, a very disturbing statistic that really bothers me is that women are diagnosed significantly later than men across the board. So for cancer in general in our country, women are diagnosed on average 2 years later than men.
So, excuse me, I'm curious about that because two things. A, is it that they're not being taken seriously, or that women are used to quite frankly, grinning and bearing it a lot of times and don't actually speak up when something doesn't seem right because they have so many other things on their plate?
It's such a good question, and I don't think we really know yet. We are, as as a sex, less likely, I think, to go in as quickly as men might, and sometimes when we do go in, we may not be taken as seriously. So I think the lesson here is that we as women, all of us, frankly, need to be our own advocates and ask a lot of questions and make sure that if something doesn't seem right or feel right to us, if we truly feel horrible and we felt horrible for a significant length of time, or we feel, significantly bad, and the pain is very bad, or we know we're not ourselves, we know our bodies better than anybody else. And so we need to become those advocates for ourselves and also for our friends. Generally in our female circles, we have the opportunity to help our friends and family members advocate for themselves. And I know that there have been times when I've sort of put myself second or fifth, in scenarios. And I've had female friends or family members say, time out. You've been talking about this for the last 6 weeks or the last 6 months. I think, have you taken the step to make an appointment to go see somebody and talk about this? And I've been very grateful for that in a couple of instances when I have put myself not at the front.
Yeah. Well, my mom's on the call, so I'm certainly not saying anything behind her back, but she had been dealing with digestive issues for a long time, and had been to the doctor multiple times. Not once did they ever suggest looking at her diet to see if there was anything that might be causing the discomfort. They were always putting a Band-Aid on it. And she's been addressing that and has made some strides, which is huge. But we talk about, lack of education around specifically women's health issues, because there's also a lack of education around nutrition. That it's just sometimes a vicious circle. And then the last question I had for you before we move on to our next topic, I wanted to go back to your comment about virtual health. So I love virtual health, and I think that there's so much that it's moved forward in our access to care and doing things, but I'm also a little bit concerned about it, because I do see over prescribing as a result of virtual health, of both medication and testing, because they're not with you physically, and there is a bit of a disconnect. I would like to hear your take on that.
The situation I just explained when I went to a virtual visit a month or so ago. I was getting ready to travel. I had 2 trips coming up, and I had been feeling poorly for a few weeks, and something had, my situation had moved into an area that I've experienced before. And I really actually did believe I had a bacterial infection and needed,
Right.
An antibiotic, but I was running, trying to get ready to go to a conference, and then had another trip right after that. So I did a virtual visit. I kid you not. I was out of that visit within 2 minutes. It was also never, I was on my computer, but we never saw each other face to face. It was just putting information into a chat. I had 4 prescriptions written for me and sent to my local pharmacy within 2 to 3 minutes. And I looked at that, and as somebody who works in employee benefits and has had this conversation, with many people many times, I just stopped and I'm like, I don't want 4 drugs. I really think I need an antibiotic to just get me over this and to be able to be functional again. So I went to the pharmacy, and, only they had, of course, filled all of them. I'm like, hey, I only need the one. So, yeah. But I personally experienced that. So I very much believe that. So, on one hand, I think we've gone from the perspective of being here, where maybe we weren't, as women, getting enough medications, in situations where we might need them, to over here from a virtual perspective, maybe getting too many. Yeah. I think that's true for all of us, though, not just women.
Yeah. We have a couple comments I'm going to pop in here. So Bronwyn Lee says, I'm proud to say that since my breast cancer diagnosis, many of my friends have went for mammograms and yearly OB visits. I mean, it is. It's we have to be a community. We have to support each other. And if somebody's experienced something, sharing it is the best thing we can do. Bronwyn's going to be a guest, I think, next week. So it'll be exciting.
I'm so thrilled. She's
Yes,
fabulous.
she is. My mom said, yeah, she was thinking the same thing when I mentioned it to her about, about the diet situation. Angela said, yes, it's really up to us as individuals to learn our bodies and communicate effectively to the physicians. And I think, I love that comment, but sometimes it can be really challenging to explain what's going on, especially maybe to a man sometimes, because they cannot. They're a physician and I have a male doctor and he's wonderful, but sometimes explaining things can be challenging. Okay, we've got another one here. It says, Kim says, yes, this is true. I used to work in open heart surgery. Nurses say MD means make decisions. And if the MD is not taught about the varying presentations between a man and a woman, then all people get treated the same. That's exactly the point you were making, Kristine, equality versus equity. This depends deeply on how the physician was taught and from whom. One of the problems is the system calls the physician now as providers. Ooh, gosh, I'm loving this one, which puts them into the category as a commodity. Commodities follow rules, then look at each person as an individual. Healthcare is a business. I think the rest of it got cut off. Okay, well, we can all just say that was fabulous. I really like that.
That's another entirely other podcast.
I know. I mean, I could just go hold down a whole nother rabbit hole, but
healthcare
physicians as providers, as a commodity. Okay, so
the patient as a profit center.
Yeah, we've talked about that. Okay, here's another one I took from your notes. An interesting. To me, interesting and disturbing fact is that both coverage and provider education is sorely lacking around women's health issues. Let's talk about that for a minute, because what are some of the most common health issues that women face?
Yeah, we could talk about this for days, Nancy.
Days,
there are so many health issues that are not only unique to women, but also health issues that are common to both men or both of us, but that present differently or are treated differently or aren't treated differently when they should be. And also a lot here that has to do with how we're willing to have conversation and to normalize certain terms about some of the things that uniquely impact women. So things like menopause or our monthly cycles, periods. Just being able to say the term monthly cycle or period in the workplace as a factual female situation is something that we were socialized to not be comfortable talking about. We weren't supposed to talk about that. We weren't supposed to breastfeed in public. Heck, we weren't even legally states, as you showed earlier. And, we're not supposed to talk about menopause. As somebody who's been there, done that, I find that incredibly disturbing. And it was very impactful personally. And I never felt like I could talk about it when I was working, with a group of men and women. It was something that I wasn't supposed to talk about in the place. And I didn't find the healthcare support there for me in a way that I needed. And this is something that I'm finding in my generation, my friend group of women who are struggling with significantly today and not finding appropriate levels of care, even from their gynecologist or their internists who are women. So I don't see the healthcare diagnosis and treatment options there for us, especially in the US, as well as from a payment coverage perspective, having been normalized and standardized in the US. And I would love to, for any of you who are joining us today, I would love to see comments around that from your own experiences, because it's something we very much need to action on. I know I want to action on it as an employee benefits consultant, not only with my clients who are self-funded, but employers that have insured coverage through the carriers. I believe that there are things that we can do that we don't need to wait for the federal government to mandate through policy. We have the ability to impact.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that. And that was actually, you kind of led right into my next point, and that is about that women have two things that dramatically impact the quality of their life that men do not experience. One is their monthly cycle or period, and the second is menopause. Men do not experience
Mhm.
either one of those things. And I think any woman that happens to be on this call would
Mm-mm.
agree that both of those things have a huge, huge impact, both physically and mentally, in the ability to do your job, in the ability to be a good partner, in the ability to be a good parent, a good friend. They can be debilitating, and we still treat it as like, hush, hush, hush. That's just, you're just going through something. You're going to get over it. And you mentioned that, the whole thought process around menopause has changed dramatically multiple times over the years. Back in the day, it was just treated with hormones, and then hormones were bad, and now hormones are good again. There's just not enough study around it. However, we seem to be perfectly comfortable studying erectile dysfunction medications. So, what's up with that?
Hmm.
Yeah. Okay, we have a couple more comments. Okay,
Yeah. I
Kim.
think from a business perspective, okay.
Yeah. Kim says all health issues stem from lifestyle, genetics, and lack of primary care access. We wait until something is unbearable rather than seeking care. If people have accessible, affordable care with price transparency, then we'll see a different society. Having access doesn't make money. Absolutely true. Therefore, it will not change from the top down. It will change from the inside out. I think from the inside out as well as from the bottom up. I think as women, as patients, as consumers, we have to demand better.
Mm-hmm. No question
And then
about it.
Sally
Was there
England said
another
she,
comment you were going to read?
yeah, one more. Sally, I've got, let's see, two. Sally England said she agreed around the two factors that impact women's lives. And then Michelle said, this is a much needed discussion. Thank you, Michelle. Um, yeah, it's just, like you said, we could talk about, I mean, we literally could talk about this for hours, and we're just barely scratching the surface of some of the inequities
Yeah.
in healthcare for women. Okay, so we touched on this a little bit earlier, but I want to bring this up to you as well, because I think we've talked about it quite a bit. Because this is not a women only issue, but the lack of nutritional counseling and education in this country is appalling. And we tend to, again,
Yeah.
want to either prescribe or take a pill to fix something that sometimes can be fixed in the kitchen. Now we go back to this, and we go back to the equity equality,
Yeah.
because we both know that lower income, often Black and Indigenous people, do not have the same access to food, education, etc. So it is a systemic issue, not just a provider issue. Your thoughts?
Yeah. No doubt. It's very much a systemic issue. Yeah, it's very much a systemic issue. We can't make healthy food if we don't have access to nutritional, and I think, right off the bat, I think of women and families, but I think of women who might live in rural areas or in other parts of the country where they live in what we call a food desert, meaning that they don't have access to, they can't get to any kind of food easily or readily within their immediate community. And when they do, in access to processed foods rather than fresh foods. So think about rural women who have access, whose literal grocery store. So I was in a dollar store. There are no fresh food options in the dollar stores that I've been into. I don't know if there's a difference, in rural communities, but right off, access to nutritional food that women in those communities have is packaged processed food, which we all know has many more preservatives into it or put into it, and a lot of processing that goes into it, which makes the food much less nutritious. But beyond that, when people do have access to more nutritional food, do they have the time to put it together? We all know that the majority of single parent households in the United States, and we have the highest percentage of single parent households in the world, or countries. And the majority of those are led by women. That's just a fact. And I know from personal experience, actually having been one, that time that I had to put together a nutritious meal with fresh food in the evening was generally not the amount of time that I wanted. And so the options that I would have liked to have seen more of when I was raising my children, and I think would greatly benefit not only women, but everyone in busy households today, are fresh takeaway. So, freshly prepared salads, or, rotisserie chickens that aren't injected with a bunch of bad things, or other things like that we could take away, are all economically available to us. So, not just through public programs where, public funds are helping people buy their food, or through our own household budgets, that we have access to things like that more readily, as well as the education that you mentioned to understand what is nutritious spirit without breaking the bank and needing 10 hours to do so.
Right, right. And I do agree with your point about that. It's especially challenging for single parents with multiple children, and generally they are working, so it becomes even more challenging. We have a couple more comments I want to share. Angela says, agreed. I feel there might also be a lot of misdiagnosed women as well. Hormones change during the month for women, and if they're not in tune with their cycle, it may be perceived as a mental condition when it's really PMS syndrome. Oh my goodness. Before we move on to the next one, let's talk about that.
Can I share a crazy, something crazy that I learned as I was preparing for this?
Absolutely.
The word hysteria actually stems for uterus, hystera. And if you go out and Google this, you can find this information. But, Plato and Socrates actually wrote about, and I don't know, do they really truly believe this, but that the uterus was some sort of a free floating organ in our bodies that, as it moved around our body, parts of the month, caused women to become mentally different and, essentially unstable, as the word hysteria implies. And so hysteria has been associated with women. So fun little unfortunate fact there for everyone.
It is an unfortunate fact, but I can speak from personal experience from both a monthly cycle, and a PMS standpoint, and a menopause standpoint. There were times when I thought I was going crazy. Genuinely thought I was going crazy because my hormones were so wacky. And so that is a real thing. Okay, one more comment. Sarah says, also as a mother, many times my priority was on my children and spouse. So if I had limited time or financial resources for medical care, it was dedicated to them. Isn't that the truth? We have historically been trained to put ourselves last.
Yeah. And in a lot of my research, I found that to be true when it comes to nutrition, when access to nutritious food and they don't have significant financial means. Many times they're more likely to give that nutrition to their children. Kind of this idea there. And as Sarah said, very much the case. We often put ourselves last. And this is an area I keep coming back to, practical ways that we can be women supporting women, or people supporting women, in making sure that the women in our community are putting themselves first more often than last, second, or third. We can encourage women to make those appointments, go to those appointments, check in on them, be accountability buddies to, or even our colleagues. Many times we may know our business colleagues, our work colleagues as well personally, but we often know, when they're having to leave to take a kid to an appointment. But we don't always know they're doing the same for themselves. And we can take the opportunity to ask them, hey, are you doing the same thing for yourself? Are you taking care of yourself? I just want to make sure, that you're caring for yourself as well. We can be accountability buddy.
Yeah, I love that. Okay, we've got two more questions before we get to the last part of the show. So Michelle said again about your hysteria, the origin of the word. That's some wild etymology. It really is. I did not know that. And then the last one says, regarding nutrition, the problem begins in the school lunch program and the government food pyramid. Well, we all, yeah. Kids in the school lunch program are only provided with brown food, bread, French fries, pizza, not colorful fruits and veggies. Yeah, that has been being tackled for so many years, and it's still not gotten very far. And then the last one, and we're going to go to the final part of the show. I never realized how important it was to put me first until cancer took a detour and made me learn that. Yeah, isn't that the truth? Before I get to the last questions that I have for Kristine, because this went, and I knew it would, went much longer than a normal program. I think that there's so much interest and so much discussion around this. I would love to do this again, maybe quarterly. So if any of you that are on this call would be interested in maybe putting together a panel, and we can talk about different topics more in depth because we've just skimmed the surface. I would love to hear from you on that. But I do need to, in the interest of time, I do need to wrap this up today. And I get to, now we've so serious. I have to like change my mindset and get on to the fun part of the show. So I always have 5 burning questions for anybody that comes on. So I realize this is a really, really sharp right, you guys. So hang in there with me. But my question to Kristine, and I ask every single guest, is what is your absolute favorite food in the world? And can you cook it?
Berry pie mode, and I can cook the pie. I've never made ice cream. So there's nothing I love more than a fresh, whatever seasonal berries are available in the pot. And we have a very simple family pie crust recipe that I make, and that has a lot of meaning in it. And then and buy whatever fresh berries are available, make that thing, slap some fresh vanilla bean ice cream on top of it, and frankly, it makes a great meal, not just a dessert.
You are speaking my language, girlfriend. As a matter of fact, it makes a great breakfast. And it also, that was what I always requested for my birthday. I never want a cake. I always want a blackberry pie. So, okay. So what is the one character trait you admire most in other people and why?
I rotate between 2, empathy and what I'll call spa. Just really a forceful person, especially a forceful woman. So from an empathy perspective, I love people who try to see things from the person who's experiencing them's perspective. Whatever the situation is, I think it's important for us to try to put ourselves in that person's shoes, their point in life, their vantage point, their economic situation, their health situation, whatever it is. When we see things from somebody else's perspective, we're able to do better and be there for them better. So I love that quality trait in somebody else. And also seeing somebody who's willing to advocate not only for themselves, but their people in their community, especially people who are disadvantaged, the underdog. Those are people that I greatly admire.
I love that. Okay, so if I flip the mirror on you and ask the question, what's the character trait in yourself that you're most proud of and why?
Tenacity. I've been down in my life, knocked down and knocked around a few more times. But as that One Hit Wonder song says, I get knocked down, but I get up again. That's something that I'm really good at. And I'm really proud of that even though when I've experienced different things and, maybe been down for a period of days or weeks, sometimes even years, back up and continue to press on and move forward.
I love that. Okay, so what is one step women can take to improve their communication with providers and demand appropriate care?
I would say only curious and as an advocate for yourself is a good approach. So generally in any relationship, including our ones, if we go at something really strongly, we're typically going to put the other person on the defensive. So, which is unfortunate, but it's a reality. So firm curiosity and advocacy can have a big impact. So, if we go to buy a car, we're generally not going to walk onto a car lot and just pick a car out without asking a lot of questions. So let's do the same thing in our healthcare situation. So let's use that example that I was using earlier, talking about women that might have a heart condition. We know clinically women present, and, treatment should oftentimes be different, diagnosis and treatment for women than men for heart conditions. So a few questions we could ask in a heart diagnostic situation might be things like, doctor, how does, this diagnose itself differently in women than men? What treatment options are available for women that might be unique to women, and why? What do the studies say that, make this treatment a better option for me as a female than a male? Why are you recommending this for me specifically? And not only that, but beyond that, really asking those questions, follow-up care, because that's where I think we have a tendency to really put ourselves last. We might go through the thing, the surgery, the procedure, the whatever, take the drug, but then we're more apt to jump back to running, and taking care of everybody else. So what can I do to make sure and be held accountable process and making sure that I'm ultimately having the best success? And then not only asking those questions of our clinical providers, but asking that of our community, of people around us, be it family, friends, to help make sure that we do achieve success as strongly as we can in that situation.
Yeah. Okay, here's a good one. What is your secret talent, or something about you that people would be surprised to learn?
This is a fun one. Fun fact here, one of the things that I more than anything else is a beautiful night out with girlfriends that ends in dancing. You just give me a dance floor and a couple of cocktails and some good 80s music and girlfriends, and I'm probably the most carefree that I ever am in my life.
Okay, well, I see one of our fellow dancers happened to pipe in there. Callie said, "Go you." Okay, last question for you. Who is the one person, famous or not famous, doesn't matter, that you would most like to meet in real life and sit down and have a cup of coffee or a glass of wine with?
Madeleine Albright is a rock star. She passed away just about a year ago. I think it was March of last year that she passed away. And there are I really admired her as I was following her political and post-political career. She has one of my favorite quotes that she used in varying forms as she was, speaking throughout her career and as a secretary of state, and even thereafter. And that quote was that there's a special place in hell for women who don't help other women. And I really, really believe in that. Sorry if I offended anybody for the use of the word hell. But she was super well educated, emigrated to the United States as a result of Nazi occupation in Czechoslovakia, where she was born. And they ultimately ended up moving to the US, I think in the late 40s. And then she became well educated and, of course, had a phenomenal career that I'm sure most of us know about. But she was a true advocate for democracy and humanitarianism, human rights, and global perspectives throughout her career. And I believe in all three of those. So I would have loved to have met her. I'm sad that she's not with us, but we can learn a lot from the teachings and her modeling in her career and life.
I love that. And let's just say it louder for those in the back that didn't hear it. There is a special place in hell for women who do not support and lift up other women. Seriously, it is one of the most important and meaningful things we can do in our lives. So I'm going to wrap this up. But again, I want to put this out there to everybody that if this is something that you would like us to have a continuing discussion around, we'd love to do it. Kristine has done a lot of work, a lot of personal research, as well as statistical research on this subject, and I would love to bring together a panel to go into some of these topics a little bit further. But I just can't thank you enough for your insights, your empathy, your compassion, just your friendship, all the things. I'm so proud to know you, and this has been an absolutely fabulous discussion. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank
All right.
you, and back at you, sister.
All right. Thanks, everybody, for joining, and I'll see you next week.